All right. So I think we are all aware of what TJ has been kind of working us through on Wednesday evenings, that being Paul's letters. And when TJ was pitching this idea to me, 13 letters over the course of 13 weeks, that's one of those things you just can't pass up. So I thought it was a really cool idea. And on Wednesday mornings, we have a Bible class that meets there in the chapel. We just finished studying the book of Isaiah. That's kind of been a holdover from over at the Southside Building days. Just wrapped that up there. And the next book that we are going to talk about on Wednesday mornings was Romans. We've had that in the pipeline for a while, and it was pitched again to our Bible class here, said, hey, do you guys want to talk about Romans? And everybody said, yeah, we'd like to talk about Romans. So the plan was to start Romans after we finished Isaiah, and we did that today. Kind of got a nice introduction going into the book of Romans. And so a few weeks ago when TJ was kind of pitching this idea to me, he said, hey, I'm going to be out of town in a few weeks. Would you care to cover for me? I said, sure. And so he told me, 13 letters, 13 weeks, all that good stuff. And I said, okay, so what book's it going to land on when it gets to my turn to fill in for you? And funnily enough, the answer would be Romans. We are going to talk about Romans tonight. So I've gotten to introduce Romans twice today. And between this morning and this evening and some Sunday evenings, Brother Dale is also studying through Romans. There's a lot of Romans going on around here, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's something that we really cannot get enough of. It is an awesome, awesome book. And so what I kind of want to do tonight is just kind of follow in TJ's format and kind of take a step back and give us a broad aerial view of Romans. I'd like to kind of fire through the context, the setting, and then hopefully, Lord willing, hit each of the 16 chapters, just a very brief overview of them to get an overall flow so we can see the narrative and how all these things work together. This morning, I only made it to chapter 4, so that's my goal for this evening. If we can make it past chapter 4, I think we'll be doing pretty good. So let's go ahead and get started. You can go ahead and turn to Romans in your Bibles if you would like, and let's talk about the setting. So the author of Romans is pretty undisputably Paul. I don't think anybody has any real contention there. Although the letter was penned, actually put pen to parchment, by Paul's amanuensis, Tertius. We get that there in Romans chapter 16, verse 22. So while Paul was telling Tertius all these things, Tertius was the guy actually writing them down. He includes a little greeting himself. He says, I, Tertius, who penned this letter, also greet you. So he gets a little bit of spotlight there. And from the book of Acts and later statements there in Romans, we learn that Paul most likely wrote this letter during his third missionary journey in probably the spring of AD 57, while staying in Corinth on his way to Jerusalem. There's the texts up there, Acts chapter 20, verse 3, Romans 15, 25 through 29, and Romans 16, 1 and 23. All give us a little bit of insight, contextual clues as to while Paul is staying in Greece for 3 months, likely hung out at Corinth. Corinth was a pretty important place for Paul, and so it is there that many believe he wrote the book of Romans. Now, Romans is widely regarded as Paul's magnum opus, his greatest work, among various Bible teachers, scholars, commentators, preachers, and it's also the longest of Paul's letters, which is why we get it here at the start of the New Testament. Paul's letters are put in the Bible in order of length, so Romans being the longest, it gets to start off the list. And Romans is unique in that while most of Paul's letters were written to churches that he had been to and visited and established and was now giving pastoral care to, right? Paul goes, he sets up a church, and then they run into issues, and so Paul says, you guys need to shape up here, fix this, stop doing that in his letters. Romans is unique in that Paul is writing to a church he had not yet been to. So this makes it a little bit different than Paul's other letters. Nero had just become the emperor of Rome. He reigned from 54 to 68 AD. So if Paul is writing Romans in 57 AD, that kind of falls right there in the middle. And at this point, Nero had not yet begun persecuting the Christians in Rome. So we see more of a desire from Paul to go and to visit this church. And what's cool about this letter, about Romans, is that it's Paul's chance to expound and expand upon the gospel message to a church that had not yet been instructed with his teachings. In fact, here in Romans chapter 1, verse 7, as part of Paul's greeting, he says, "To all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints." We have some early manuscripts of the book of Romans that lack that "in Rome" there in verse 7, which would make it read more like this: "To all those who are loved by God and called to be saints," which gives some credibility to the idea that Romans, while written initially for this church here in Rome, was intended to go out to other churches as well. So not just limited to the Roman church. Other churches dealing with similar issues, similar things going on in their assemblies. So this book is cool in that it kind of acts like a new, I don't want to say perspective, but it's for a new Christian audience with new eyes who are seeing many of these things for the first time, which allows Paul to tackle the basics and also get really deep and really heavy into some of the more weighty matters of the gospel message. Romans is kind of written like a catch-all. It's a total treatment of the gospel message, the Christian faith, and our lives as followers of Christ, and includes some very important details about our Christian walk that many times we miss. We have blind spots